Hi, so I'm continuing with my previous video on effective communication, where I talked about what exactly effective communication is and the various terminologies which are attached to the effective communication. So we talked about understanding into what communication is. Then we talked about interpersonal communication. Then who is a communicator, who is a receiver, what is perceptual screening, how to define a message, and role of feedback and role of language in effective communication. Also, we talked about what is exactly data is about and when and what medium to use when you are sharing a numeric data and we talked about information and the richness of information, how you can create a richness in information, and the basic model of interpersonal communication we talked about in our previous video. Now today I will talk about reflective listening. What exactly reflective listening is? So in my previous video, basically I talked about from speaker's point of view, how a speaker should effectively communicate and what different mediums he or she need to use to be able to effectively communicate. But this is from the receiver's end. The reflective listening is from the other end, the person who is actually repeating back to the speaker who is sharing the information. So what exactly the reflective listening is all about? Actually, it's a skill of listening carefully to another person and repeating it back to the speaker. Okay, it's like, for example, in an office meeting, if one of the colleague says this complex process need to be divided to be understood. So listening to this, the other colleague may say, who is listening carefully, and he may interpret this message in a different way. He will refer it back to your point by saying, what I heard you say that we will understand the process better if we will break it into different steps. So the message was carefully received, the message was carefully listened by the other person, and other person is actually repeating it back and in a more simplified way, the way he or she has understood that particular message is a part of reflective thinking. So the word itself is saying reflective thinking. You listen to the speaker and then you reflect on the message and then you kind of repeat it back to the speaker, that what is your understanding into the message. That is what reflective listening is about. Now we will talk about the various parts of various importance of reflective listening. So basically reflective listening helps communicator clarify intended message and correct misunderstanding or understanding into the message being received, and it also emphasizes the role of the receiver. Okay, that there is some responsibility on the part of the receiver who is receiving the message. It's not entirely on to the speaker who is sharing the information. So it's the responsibility of the receiver also, how attentively he has been listening to the message has been shared. Especially useful in problem solving when so basically reflective listening is very useful when you are discussing various organizations problems and you have to refer back to what the other person is, the information shared by the other person, and then you need to use your reflection to actually refer back to the different points discussed in a meeting. So it is a very important tool in problem solving. So reflective listening emphasize on careful listening and referring it back to the speaker what he has been sharing with you. Then other emphasis of reflective listening is the personal element of the communication process. Okay, and the feelings communicated in the message and the rational and consideration of the various responses which has been received by the receiver. So basically the emphasis on feeling part, understanding part, and the rational part, which is important part in when you listen to a certain problems and you try to find solution to it, and you are into a two-way communication with the other party. So that is what emphasis the reflective listening has. Now this reflective listening has two parts of communication: verbal communication and the non-verbal communication. So how you can establish effective reflective listening through verbal communication? So it has four parts to it. First is affirm contact. Okay, so this is the first thing you need to do if you want to do a reflective listening. Then second is paraphrasing what has been heard. Okay, then third is clarify the implicit thing or implicit message you have understood. Then reflecting the core feeling, like what you feel about what you have listened, and what are your thoughts and feelings about what you have listened. So the first point, affirm contact. Affirm contact also means it kinds of reflects that you have been attentive in listening, and you are referring back to the points which has been shared with you. So you communicate with the attentiveness. Okay, it also provides assurance in expressing thoughts and feelings to the speaker also, that you are paying attention to it. So like affirm is that you are in your full senses, you are paying attention to every detail shared with you. So this is the first step in reflective listening. Then comes paraphrase, and reflect. So paraphrase is actually the process where you reflect back to speaker what has been heard, assures accuracy, builds empathy, openness, and acceptance. Because you reflect and you try to paraphrase in a certain way, the way you have understood the message. Okay. Then comes clarify and implicit. So in this particular phase, you brings out unspoken but evident thoughts and feelings which you are having, and you try to build a greater awareness among your teammates with whom you are communicating. So it brings out a kind of a greater awareness into the message being shared and referred back to. Then comes reflect core feelings. So it kind of restates the important thoughts and feelings you have, and you need to exercise the caution, danger of overreaching or over reacting to what has been heard. Now we'll move on to the non-verbal part of reflective listening. So in this, first most important thing is silence, where speaker need to exercise silence. Why? Because it's very useful in thinking to the speaker, and also determines how to express difficult idea or feeling. So you will get some pause time for yourself, and you will listen to whatever the information has been fed back to you, and you will reflect it, and you try to come up with different ideas to clear doubts in the mind of the receivers. Okay, then comes listening. Listener is a part, first is speaker's part, the second is listener's part. On listener's parts, actually sort out thoughts. So silence gives you a time to sort out the various thoughts and feeling, the various ideas which are flowing into your mind. Okay, and it's kind of it's kind of a time for you to identify and isolate the personal responses or the personal your actually perceptions, your biases which are operating in your thought process. So it's a time for you to kind of separate yourself or sort out your feelings or the thoughts which are kind of coloring your perception about whatever the message has been received from the speaker. Now there's another part to nonverbal communication. Reflective listening is eye contact. Is useful to open a relationship. Most research says that face to face and with a better eye contact, you will be able to establish rapport with the other person, and you will pay attention to what has been shared. Second important part is it kinds of improves the communication, but you need to exercise a caution. You need to understand various cultural differences. Some culture where establishing a eye contact with the other gender may not be appreciated, so you need to be careful in which cultural context you are operating. So it may be offensive to some people in different cultures. So that is something you need to use with the caution. Okay. Then use moderate eye contact. You don't have to just keep gazing the other person or keep staring the other person. You need to use other focal points in between. So use a moderate contact rather than continuously looking into other person's eyes. So use times of no eye contact for privacy and control. So that is the time when you are not in having an eye contact with the other person, so you can use the time for taking down notes or listening to or paraphrasing your thought process. That is something you can look at. Now so this was the theoretical part which we have discussed, but there are some other things which are beyond the book which you need to listen up, you need to exercise to have a improved reflective listening. So the number of things which I will share with you is, it starts with stop talking, put the speaker at ease. You should not, keep on talking, otherwise it will become a more of a, one-way communication. It will not encourage the two-way communication. So you need to put the speaker to ease, and you need to develop a rapport. Show the speaker you want to listen, you are referring back to his or her point, and you are paying full attention to what has been said. Then you need to remove certain distraction from the environment. Okay, so you need to, so that other person has assurance that you are paying full attention to it. Empathize with the speaker. Okay, if he has certain concerns, or if he has or she has raised certain issues, you need to empathize with the person. You need to show the concern what he is saying. You have a 100% commitment to resolving the different issues he or she has been highlighting. Then be patient, don't be aggressive. Okay, hold your temper, go easy on the criticism. Okay, so it's not personal. Criticism should not be taken personally. You should always remember you are there to resolve organization's problems. Okay, these are not your personal problems, so keep that aside. Hold on to your temper, go easy on criticism, ask questions. Okay, paraphrase them and clarify the various doubts you have. Okay, stop talking, be sure the speaker has finished before you talk. Okay, so basically you need to evaluate yourself which of these items you do most, and what are the items you need to work on. Think of specific times you had, you know, uh, uh, when communicating with your co-workers or peer or your supervisors. So what are the issues you have faced? So have you been practicing the reflective listening? So that is something, these are the guidelines you need to follow. You need to make sure that you have been communicating and you have been effectively, and at the same time you are a reflective listener. You are paying attention to what has been shared with you. Now, another thing which I want to share with you when you are having effective communication, so there are two ways the communication has been done. First is one-way communication, another is a two-way communication. So one-way communication, a person sends a message to another person and no questions, feedback or interaction is followed. But this kind of communication is good for giving simple instructions or directions to the people, but it's not very efficient, but often less accurate sometimes. So you need to exercise caution while having a one-way communication, that whatever information you are sharing, you have all the factual information, correct factual kind of information with you when you are having a one-way communication. Then you have a two-way communication, an exchange of thoughts and feelings through which shared meanings often occurs. Okay, it is a very good tool for problem solving, where you are kind of encouraging the speakers to participate in the discussion and provide different ideas or the thought process or the feelings they have about whatever been discussed in the meeting. So it's very important to have a two-way communication when you want to have an effective communication in your organization. Now I will describe the 5 communication skills for effective supervisors or managers which they need to exercise if they want to have a effective communication at their workplace. First is expressiveness, second is empathy, third is sensitivity, fourth is persuasion, and fifth is informative. So what is expressiveness? You need to express your thoughts and feelings and your ideas openly. You should not hide any information, you should not lie any information. So you need to share what you have been thinking, what is going on there in your mind. Also at the same time you need to exercise empathy, both on the listener's parts as well as on the speaker's part. You need to empathize, you need to show empathy, that you are listening, which I've already said to you previously. You need to show that you are paying attention to the concern raised by the other party, and you have full commitment in resolving it. Other person should not think that you are not serious and you have been kind of taking the things lightly. Okay, so you need to empathize, you need to practice empathy. At the same time you need to be sensitive also to certain like I said, you need to be sensitive towards the cultural context in which, or the diversity in which you are operating, the gender diversity, the cultural diversity you are operating in. Okay, so you need to practice, like for example, I've said that in Islamic countries you need to be at a question where how you interact with the women, so you need to follow the cultural norms. Okay, so that is something you need to watch your body language. So that is something you need to be careful about. You need to be sensitive towards those different issues which may become barriers in effective communication. Then persuasion, so manager is all about not giving up. Managerial job is about that, supervisory job is about that. You need to put forward your idea, you need to show certain persuasiveness, where you need to give a message to the speakers or to the listeners that whatever you are saying, you feel strongly about it, and you have your full intention in resolving those issues you have been discussing. Also, the last one, but the most important one, whatever information has been shared need to be informative. Okay, it should provide certain new information, database information, factual information about whatever problem has been discussed in the meeting. So that is something you need to keep it in mind when, if you want to have a effective supervisory communication or managerial communication. So that is something you need to keep it in mind. Now there are various barriers and gateway through the effective communication. So we will talk about these various barriers that kind of distorts, disturb, even halts successful effective communication. So what are these barriers to the communication? So there are, this is not the exhaustive list, I'm just highlighting 4-5 broad one. It can be more than that, which different literature talk about the different barriers in communication. So first is the physical separation. Okay, the geographical location or the office location becomes sometimes a very important barrier in communication when people are in different locations, or people are traveling, or they don't have a effective connectivity. So it becomes difficult, especially people working in remote areas, or awards weather conditions. So physical separation becomes difficult in communication. Then comes status differences. Different culture has a different take on it. Okay, because the organization which follow hierarchy very strictly, so people at the lower level in the hierarchy or in the middle level in the hierarchy may not participate in any group discussion, or it may be mostly one-way communication which may be happening, or the people at the receiving end they don't have or they are not allowed to speak. So that also becomes a kind of a barrier in effective communication. So you need to keep it in mind that how you want to create a hierarchy, and whether you want to encourage the two-way communication. That is something as a manager you need to decide what sort of thing you want. If you want an effective communication, you need to overcome this status differences, and you need to encourage people from the different level in the hierarchy to participate in the discussion. Then gender differences is another important issue. Okay, it has been said that and research says that men prefer side by side conversation in the sitting arrangement, whereas women prefer face to face discussion. So and in the case of men, they need to have certain something as a focal point in front of them where they can focus and they can talk, and they kind of have a minimal eye contact when they do a conversation with other people, or especially with the other gender. So that's what research says. So gender differences also becomes, and also the research says that women share very only 20% of the information in the meetings. They don't share much information in the meeting. So they are kind of reason is something known to them. So so there are gender differences which becomes a barrier in the communication. Then comes cultural diversity. That also has a lot of issue, like the culture which promotes kind of a hierarchical communication, like especially where Germany, where seniority has a lot of importance, where when the senior person in the meeting is talking, people who are the member of junior level hierarchy, they are not allowed to speak. So that also becomes a cultural diversity, also becomes a major issue or major barrier in the effective communication. But that is not the case in the context of American culture, where everybody is encouraged to participate. So cultural diversity also becomes one of the barrier in effective communication. Then comes language. Though English is the most spoken language in the world, still sometimes some countries like have a different meaning even in English also. Like for example, in Great Britain, lift means elevators, which is used to commute from one floor to another floor. Okay, whereas in the American context, they use the word ride for the elevator. So different meaning, same language, English language, but have a different meaning in different geographical locations. So that also, language also sometimes becomes a barrier. Sometimes the acronyms used, the lingos used, okay, in one culture may not be familiar in another culture or another country. So that is also another barriers in effective communication. So that is something you need to take care of if you want to have a effective communication. So that's all, friends, for today. I have covered various points today with regard to reflective listening and one-way communication, two-way communication, and effective supervisory communications, and barriers to the communication. So this is something which we have discussed. So I will continue in my next video, and I will try to wind up this topic. So until then, bye, take care.